All right, next we are going to go over Chapter 11, which is on debugging an application. And if I bring up this is one of the ones we're going to look at later, so don't worry about it right now. This isn't important. But if you look up here, we got the standard icons that are right here. All right, and if I right mouse click on here, you'll notice there's another one for debugging. So there's more stuff that you can add if you want to be able to debug your application. If you don't want it anymore, just highlight a blank space again and remove it. All right. But debugging, why do you debug? Well, you want to find errors in your program, right? So one way that you can debug, and we may have even talked about this before, but we're going to look at it again, is I can grab any statement that's in here and I can take my mouse and in this area that's gray over here, it's called the gutter area. I can click in there and I can put in what's called a breakpoint. Now there's 3 different modes that you can be in a program. Right now I'm in design mode. All right, I'm not running the program. Once you run the program, you're in run mode. All right, but if it comes to a breakpoint and it stops, then you're in break mode. That's really the 3 different modes that you can be in for a program. Now I set a breakpoint, I click on it again, and that disables it or removes it, I guess. So, says in chapters 3 and 5, you learn how to work in break mode when a runtime error occurs. You learn then how to use the exception assistant, how to use data tips, how to use a breakpoint. All right. And it says as your application gets more complex, debugging gets more complicated, and it does. Your programs get longer, so there's a better chance for errors. One way to try to reduce or minimize the number of errors, one of the ways I've shown you is to try to modularize a program. So if you've got errors, you know where to go look for it. Rather than writing one big main routine with 500 lines, you might write 50 different routines, each of which are 10 lines long. All right. So there's basic debugging techniques in here, followed by how to use the debugging windows. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not an expert on this stuff, not in the slightest. So, setting up these different options. Now, when you notice in here, this is the options dialog box. It says to display the debugging options, you can use debug options command. So let's look at that. But there's debug. Down near the very bottom, second from the bottom, are options. There they are. All right. These are the ones that are in here are the default options. But as we start looking through here, back up. The author says this dialog box lets you set general options like whether the exception assistant is displayed when an exception occurs. It also lets you enable or disable, edit, and continue, and there's other things that you can do. All right? You literally can set it up if you want to, that even if your program doesn't work, you can have it keep running anyway. I mean, that potentially can be dangerous to do something like that, but you can do it if you want to. And you'll notice these are the general ones, but there's other ones. I've not worked with any of the other ones other than the ones that are here. But as you get, if you were a C# programmer, you could do work with SQL Server, which is Microsoft's database that's typically used with C#. All right, there's other ones that are in here as well. There's just database tools, performance tools, etc. This is the exception settings. All right, you can say what you want to show and what you don't want to show. So it says by default, the edit and continue feature is on in the dialog box. Okay. By default, an application will typically enter break mode only when an exception is thrown, and there is no exception handling code for that exception. Well, you know this because we've been writing try-catch blocks. It's nothing new to you. All right. It says, although you should be aware of the options in the options dialog in the exception settings windows, you normally will not need to change them. I would agree with that. All right. Break mode, as we talked about already, your program's running, but for some reason you're getting a goofy result and you don't know why. and you can't figure it out. All right, so you can, on the line that is giving you the goofy result, not on that line, but typically on the next executable line after that, you'll set a breakpoint. You might set one on the line before it and on the line after it. So you can get a before and after type of picture to see if indeed what's happening is what you envision is happening. Again, quite often when this happens, it's what we call those logic errors. You're doing one operation when you mean to be doing another operation, for example. All right. So to enter break mode, as it says, you can force an unhandled exception to be thrown. You can set a debug, a breakpoint. You can choose debug step into or hit F11, or you can do a debug break all and do a control all break. Let's talk about the differences between these. To force an unhandled exception to be thrown, if I did something like this, I would come in here and let's just say I set up 3 variables. And I say int x equal 12, int y equals 0, int z equals x divided by y, which is 12 divided by 0. It probably is going to throw some kind of an exception. And if I don't handle it, the program will probably blow up. I just showed you how to set a breakpoint. If your program is running and you're like, geez, this thing is running so darn fast, I can't figure out what's happening, you can hit the F11 key. And if you notice in here, this is the program we're going to look at a little bit later, but I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to come back out here, and it's this program here, and this is my main form right there. So don't worry about it. But if I run it and I do this, you're going to see this after the break. I'm changing screens here. And I just use colors so you could see what was happening. So I can go back to my home screen at any time. I can exit at any time. That probably makes sense to you. But if it's like, wow, you're going through that way too fast, I can't really figure out what's happening. You can hit the F11 key up on your function keys up on top, and that'll, again, yours will work, mine won't because Camtasia doesn't like this. I always forget that. But it'll run your program a line at a time. And each time you hit F11, it'll run the next line. All right? Now, hopefully I didn't turn that off. Good. Good. How to work with data tips. It says in Chapter 3, you'll learn the basic skills for working with data tips. The next figure will review these skills and give you something additional. All right. The bottom line is this. If you take your mouse and you put it over this thing in yellow here, that's the exception assistant. You should be able to click in there and get more information about the error. Sometimes the explanation you get will be very good. You'll be able to totally figure it out. This morning, we're doing a calculator program in the Android class, and we're using what's called a spinner, which is a drop-down list to show the different kinds of operations that you're using, okay? And I was running into some problems with this. And you don't have this nice exception assistant like we have. You don't have that in Java Android. You basically have what's called a run window, and the run window shows you the error and where the error took place, but it gives you no explanation of what happened. So what do? You take the error, you put Java Android error, you paste that in, and you go into Google with that. Why? Because somebody probably out on Stack Overflow has already encountered that error. But here it's much easier because you get much more detailed information. All right? Breakpoints we've already talked about, so there's not really a whole heck of a lot more to say about those. All right? I showed you how to set it. Typically, I click in that gutter area as it says. I think you could be on the line and hit F9 also. I've never used that, so I don't know. You can disable breakpoints one at a time or all of them at a time. Now, a couple things as it says. You can set a breakpoint only on a line with an executable statement. Don't try to set breakpoints on comments, on blank lines, etc. They just won't work. You'll know whether or not it works because you'll get that cyan colored dot if it worked, and nothing if it doesn't work. When Visual Studio encounters a breakpoint, it enters break mode before it. So it's the line. It does not execute that line. It stops at that line. So everything before that line is available to you, but it's stopping right there. The current breakpoints, as it says, will be displayed in the breakpoints window that you can look at using Debug Windows Breakpoints. As it says, it's most useful for enabling and disabling if you've got a lot of breakpoints. All right. It says if you point to a breakpoint in the margin indicator, 2 will appear. That's just more about using that window. It's not that big a thing. All right. Controlling the execution of your application. This is how you can move around in that debug toolbar. Again, the only way that this will make sense to you is to try it. This is one of those things on your next test. I'm not going to test you on this. What would I do? I mean, if you do have another test on this, on 9, 10, and 11, all I'd give you from this thing is I would probably give you a program that had errors in it and ask you to find them. Okay? So these are the different toolbar options. These are their keyboard equivalents. And basically, this is what you choose from the menu. All right. Run to cursor is kind of neat because you can put your mouse on any line in your program that's executable and choose the run to cursor option, and the program will go to that point and then stop. It's like you set a breakpoint right there, basically. All right. So again, the step into and step over are ones that you can use. And why does that even matter? Well, think about step over. If I was writing a really difficult program where I was looping through something a million times, I wouldn't want to do step into where I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 a million times. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. But if I did the step over, I could say, okay, run that a million times, and now that you're done, now stop. All right? So again, these things do have their uses depending on what you're doing with them. Using the debugging windows, again, this stuff is important. If you look down up on the screen here, this is called your locals window. So if you set a breakpoint, it's going to start showing you things in your locals window. What does that mean? That means it's going to show you the value of variables that have been set up till that point. All right, so you can make sure that the variables you're working with have the values you think they will have. It is even possible to come in here and change these values while the program is running and you're in break mode. Oh, I wonder what would happen if I did this. Now, and when you think about why you might want to do something like that, okay, if I want to take, and let's say that I've got something that I want to have that's 18%. Are you all with me? And I want it to print out wages increased by 18%. Okay? So I set it up correctly, and I say P is the formatter that I want to use, but instead of using 0.18, I use the number 18. So instead of it saying that wages increased by 18%, it says wages increased by 1,800%, which is wrong. All right? So I can go into my locals window and I can change that value and run the program again, and then it should be, quote, fixed, unquote, without you having to literally stop the program, fix it, and run it again. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. So it says the locals window displays information about the variables within the current scope. All right, where you are right now. There's also an autos window. It's like the locals window, but it only has information about the current statement you're working on and the one before it. All right. You can also put on variables what are called watches. So what that says is while you're stepping through the program, anytime that variable changes, it will show you the change in what's called a watch window. And it looks very much like what we just looked at with the locals window. So they mention here the watch window lets you view the values of watch expressions while the application is in break mode. You can read through that if you've got a desire. All right. How to execute the immediate window to execute commands. What the heck is the immediate window? Well, if you look in here, let's see. Let's come into here, and I'm just going to put right there, I'm going to put a breakpoint in. Okay, I'm stopped. Can you see that? I put a breakpoint in there, and I purposely set it so it stops. So here's my locals window. It tells me what's currently active. I'm running the main form. It's telling me who sent this here. I clicked on text that said blue. It's telling me where I'm located, etc. And then over here, I've got the call stack that's showing me the different things that are in here. Well, if you look down here, this is hard to see, but it also says here exception settings, and it says next to that, it says immediate window. If I click in the immediate window, now why would you want to do this? I don't know, but you can. So I'm going to put in here, for example, question mark, and I'm going to put in 45 times 4 and hit enter. And it does 180. So if I need an answer to something quickly, I can get it this way. All right, immediately, hence the name of the window. The call stack I started to show you, but basically what the call stack is it shows you the last method that was called, then the one that called that, then the one that called that, then the one that called that. And when you work your way through there, it's called a stack backtrace. Remember a stack we talked about a little bit, and I said it's like the at a cafeteria. It's like all the trays that are on there. The last one that's in is the first one that's out. It's LIFO. That's the same way that the stack backtrace works. It shows you the last call function, then the one that called that, then the one that called that, etc. So if you need to go through your call progression in a program, you can use the stack window. All right, so how to use the call hierarchy to navigate through your code. It's pretty much what I just told you. All right. How to use the output window to view project information. Well, this output window, it's not that important for what we're doing, but a little bit later, when we start to bring in databases, and you want to make sure that your database has been synced or linked to your project, you'll get messages in here. All right, so depending on what you're doing, that window can be very important. All right, you can also write to that window, and they show you that in here. I'm not going to go through that. The visualizer dialog box to view strings. All right. In your locals window, what it says in here is you can come in here and you can see this in different formats. Probably the only one that'll make a lot of sense to you right now, especially you new people, will be text visualize. But if you want to see the HTML interpolation of that, you can use that. The XML, which is extensible markup language, you can use that. And JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, you can use that. All right, and that's it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break in just a minute. But before we take that break, when we come back from the break, where are we here? We are going to go over Chapter 10. All right. My guess is going over that chapter will take somewhere in the vicinity of a half an hour. All right. And I mean, there's stuff in here like how to set tab order. I showed you that almost in day one. So I'm not going to spend any time on that stuff. But there are a few things in here that are important. And then after we do that, I'm going to go through the example that I emailed you this morning. All right, there's 2 programs in there. So this program, it looks like it's about, what? That's a little longer. It'll take at least a half an hour, I would say. It is 9:03. Let's come back, please, and we'll start up again. Let's make it 9:18. That'll give you 15 minutes to take a break.